Royal Caribbean sinks despite stronger than expected earnings. And welcome to a very special edition of Mackey's Retail Roundup. I'm joined by Herb Greenberg, the captain himself, the man, the myth, the legend, and an old dear friend. Now, Herb, I wanted to start with cruises because you've gone on more cruises than anyone I know. You're like the Captain Steubing of the commercial set. But you also were kind of skeptical of this stock group. When I went out looking, I was impressed by the experience I had recently. You said not so fast, buddy. You kind of stuck a little unofficial red flag in it. It's talk to me about how you saw that, how you're about to go on a cruise yourself, the industry and some of the headwinds you think that's going into, because the market certainly didn't see it coming today. They were pretty excited about Royal Caribbean, and man, it's getting smacked.
Yeah, well, I've been on close to 20 cruises right now, including a few rivers. I've been doing this for about 25 years. It's the way my wife and I go and see the world. We don't do it just to go to the Caribbean or the Mediterranean. And so we have a way of looking at it, and we go on smaller ships, anywhere between 4 and 6 and even 800, 900 people. So those are relatively small. And we have a view of the way the world has gone. And I have a general concern that longer term, the industry will see potential overcapacity. They're bringing on a lot of expedition ships, and there are only so many places you can do an expedition trip that you really want to do. I think you have a very limited audience for that. I think you see a backlash on some of this. There are places you cannot go in terms of increasingly there are ports that do not want these big monstrous cruise ships, which are amazing for the companies, but they're just amazing. Geopolitically, I think you're starting to eliminate some of the very important, interesting itineraries out there for people who do want to use it as a way to see the world. But I do think there are things changing, and you basically helped open me up to part of this, my eyes up to some of this. When you recently got back from your cruise and you were on Silversea, I'll be on Seabourn for 24 days starting next week. It's a cruise line we've been on multiple times. It's owned by CCL. It's owned by Carnival. And it is and we've been on Regent also, which is owned by Norwegian Caribbean. These are the quote unquote luxury lines. And there's a tug of war going on right now, Jeff. Because what you saw when you went on there was people your age, you're say 20 years younger than I am. So you saw a lot of people in your demographic who were saying, hey, you said the guys would say, we were dragged on here by our wives or whatever the case was. And then they said, hey, this isn't so bad, because everyone has this image in their heads about what a cruise is, to the point you're almost embarrassed to say you did it, because on Wall Street, there's so much pompous and arrogance regarding this. And what you find, though, is there's this younger demographic. And, again, you have the gargantuan cruise ships that attract all sorts of people, not my cup of tea. And then you have this other class of cruise lines. And then you have one above it, a super premium that's coming out from Ritz-Carlton, Four Seasons, 100, 200 passengers, super expensive, even, way expensive. So now they're
leaning into that, though. Royal Caribbean's leaning into that. They say that that's the future. They're coming online with more of these Silver Seas, and yet you're kind of looking past that and saying they're coming to online. Like there's going to be such an influx of these ships, they're going to be ahead of themselves.
So many. The question is now, but there is this thing, and again, I'm not. Let me tell you something. You and I have a friend, Berna Barchet, and I talked to Berna about this a year ago, and I said, Berna, look at the issues over here, and she said, Herb, you don't get it. She said, you're in a very narrow niche of the market that cruises. There's a much bigger niche out there that doesn't care about the kind of things I care about, because I start to see over the years severe cost cutting at the high end. Just they're taking back services. The ships are well staffed, cutting back on food. But there's one thing I want to point out, and I noticed this last night because I spend a lot of time really keeping up on the industry, going through these forums of cruise forums of ships we're going to be going on. And there's something happening at the Norwegian Caribbean. It's something called Regent. And so they've changed their policy on dress, formal dress at night on the ship. Used to be
Yeah.
years ago, they would have these formal dinners where you had to wear a tuxedo and, once or twice during the trip, which was just horrendous, right? Or you'd have to have a coat and a tie. And that's slowly been relaxed. But now they're saying, you want to come on, wear, jeans and, dress sneakers or whatever the case, they say, not a problem. And the old guard, the older people are saying, wait a minute, I don't like this change.
Yeah.
Silver Sea, which you're on, it typically is known as one of the last formal cruise lines out there, which really actually demands a dress attire at night. I think that's all going to start to change because apparently your age group and people younger than you seem to like going on cruise lines. But there is this issue with so much capacity, fewer places to go, a real difficulty getting quality staff. I think these are things that will catch up with the industry at some point.
And the staffing issue is a big one. We noticed when we were on the ship, these are not folks that are working hours that typical American hires would be willing to put up with, or, they'd be unionized in about a second and a half. They get days off every few weeks.
Can't be unionized.
No. They're specifically hired exactly for that. But this kind of illustrates the point. You pointed out a lot there. And on the surface, it seems like they're going to a higher margin, better end customer that is really kind of unaware of the industry as a whole. But you picked through that and you saw that, listen, that's going to come at a cost. It's going to be harder and harder to hire people. The boats are expensive, and there's only so many places they can go. And the solutions to that on the Royal Caribbean Gulf, it seemed like are really expensive. Or, building their own private islands and building these own events. And all of a sudden you've gone from just kind of a cruise provider to / Disneyland. That's the kind of strategic step that you and I talk about all the time. And that was kind of enough of a red flag for me. But talk to me about your process, how you found, figure that out, and what kind of hoops do you have these companies run through before you actually kind of give them a clean bill of health? Because I know you're pretty good at finding the downside in these things. It's what you do.
Well, I've never formally red flagged the cruise lines. I put them on a red flag radar at times, but I actually owned CCL and Norwegian Caribbean coming out of COVID, because I realized that Wall Street had it wrong, just because, like I said, the arrogance of Wall Street as it relates to cruises. But I also, but I always said, if their debt, as the debt grew, if they're going to start issuing more shares, it was beyond my comfort zone. So I exited those for nice profit way back then, haven't come back into them, and then seeing what I see on the ships. So I use my eyes a lot. So in something like the cruises, it is something I know, and I'm on the ships and I see the cutbacks. And I see the concerns that passengers have and that kind of thing. But beyond that, in my normal day of doing things away from cruises and just doing my process, like you said to me the other day, you said, Herb, what's your process? And I said, a lot of people ask me that. And I go, I don't have a process. And you said, well, of course you have a process. How would you get this stuff if you didn't have a process?
This is your process. Herb, you talk to people every day. You're on the phone. You've been doing this for 30, 40 years. You've had the same process. It seems to me that you do, and it's just kind of grinding.
Everybody
just figuring it
wants,
out.
on Wall Street, there's this notion that you have to have a process. People always ask, when you do institutional research, which I used to do, what's your process? Well, some people do have processes. They have checklists. They have all sorts of things they go through, and that works for them. For me, I view it as every situation is different. So my process is going to vary depending on the situation. I have the way I go about trying to cozy up the companies. And by the way, with AI, that's even changing. I have a great website I've been using that is, our website, a new business that helps me, get up to speed on companies much faster, which is really an interesting business. But I think that I have my way of doing things, but my process, a big part of my process is during the writing process. And I always tell people that I go and I do my normal, just on getting up to speed on the company, looking at the filings, trying to understand what the story is, because everything I write has to have a story, has to have a hook, has to have something that grabs my attention. Some companies they may be great red flags, but they're just too hard. They just take too much time. And honestly, I get bored looking at them. And others, even if they would appear boring to many people, might grab my attention for one reason or the other. My ideas many of them come from my network. My network has been alive and well and continues to grow after decades. And some people I will stop everything to listen to if they say, hey, have you looked at this? But what happens is you go through everything, but it isn't until the moment I sit down to write that as I'm going through that process and I'm double checking and I'm rereading transcripts and I'm reshaping through filings and I'm going looking for specific information that I start to really see the story fully play out. And I can find out where I'm wrong, where my thesis is wrong, where I need to have a bigger caveat because maybe I got this part wrong. And there are times I've actually pulled off a story or a report in this case, just because the thesis is wrong. And it just doesn't play, or I see it early, and I just don't even waste the time on it. So
years of practice doing this. I mean, you date back to Omega, you the Haskell reactor meter. I mean, what's been your best call?
Haskell reactor meter, right there. There it is. Haskell reactor
pending on that, absolutely. So you're not afraid to get in the mix a little bit. You're not afraid to take a little crap online, which I like that about you, and it brings kind of you want to hear the other side. Even if I'm wrong something, I want to hear why you think it's going to fail, why you think I'm wrong, because I know you're kicking the tires and talking to a lot of smart people. I mean, is that really sort of what the process is? I mean, it's to what degree do you know you're on the right track because people come back at you so hard, so angry, so almost personal attacks rather than numbers?
Can I tell you something, Jeff? There was a time, and the markets have changed. The structure of the markets have changed. Things that used to work don't work the same way they did before. You have to amend them. The Haskell reactor meter doesn't. The Haskell reactor meter, which of course is made up, but is something you feel is just the amount of hostilities you get from writing about anything. And by the way, I do not, at this stage of my life, I don't need that headache. I try to keep my blood pressure in check. But that said, I will tell you that you end up with a situation where you can see it with these meme stocks. You could see it in 2021. You start writing about some of these things, and then you hear from yahoos who are new to the market. They've discovered the market is an easy place to make money. They just mouth off knowing absolutely nothing. That's when you know that these people are going to probably wind up at some point. If it's not on this stock, it's going to be the next or the next, holding a very empty bag. I think that you still have to look at the hostilities sometimes, though, and you do have to see if you are wrong. Where I've looked wrong right now, and I didn't have much hostility, but with some of the narratives, there have been recent narratives in the market, whether it's nuclear, where maybe I pick a company and I say this company has some factual issues, or rare earths. I've had a few very notable, very recently, that make me look foolish, but I wouldn't change a word in anything I wrote. And when I wrote about it, again, because these became memes or they had a huge narrative and a push behind them, and I know people didn't do the work on them, many people didn't,
Right.
There was going to be, I didn't see with the rare earth company, a company called MP Materials, I didn't see the government coming in and taking a stake in the company, because that's not something you usually see. That wasn't on the bingo card, but geopolitical risk was. So, again, it changes with everyone, Jeffrey.
And it's really kind of, having watched you do it for years, you can see that process sort of congeal for you. And as you're writing, as you're thinking about, and as you're just kind of putting the pieces together, it's the good idea kind of emerges, and you know what sort of piece you're writing, and as you kind of get into the weeds a little bit, it's actually, we kind of bounced ideas off one another for 30 odd years at this point. We're getting to be a little gray, but still useful. It's I know you've got a live event tomorrow, Red Flag Alert event, a live streaming with our friends over at StockMarketTV. Tell me what you're going to be talking about, and tell me that it sounds like this is just a transition from sort of these private conversations you and I have had on the phone for years, and kind of giving people a little bit of a peek behind the curtain in terms of the way you think and the way you react.
Well, I'm making a transition to a different platform. And so as part of that, we're doing this as a relaunch of what I've been doing for years, currently on Substack and other places, right? It's just the world is changing, and I'm just trying to evolve with it. And I'm getting some nifty new tools and things and access to a team and that I haven't had in the past, which is pretty exciting while I remain independent, very firmly independent. This is going to be something where we're going to spend some time going through an anatomy of a scam. And by this scam, we mean there's been a WhatsApp stock scam involving, to some extent, mostly small Chinese stocks, but not always all small Chinese stocks that trade on the NASDAQ capital markets. Most of them are in NASDAQ capital markets, which is what I like to call the NASDAQ's home. It's like the NASDAQ's version of the Vancouver Stock Exchange. Come one, come all you have to do is afford the listing fees. And so I'm going to go through how I ended up, the backstory of how I ended up with this with this one, going after these scams or doing some work on them. I haven't done deepest dives on the entire scams, but I actually started with one that fell almost lost all of its value very shortly after I wrote about it. And these are scams that have pulled people in from around the world who I've heard these just horror stories from people who've lost anywhere from $10, $20, $30,000 to hundreds of thousands of dollars, investing in this because they're told they're now insiders and they know nothing. And it's so sad. But it all plays to the fear and greed of Wall Street. And we're going to go through that, and then we'll go through some of what I do, how I do it. Maybe talk about some of the names currently on my red flag alerts list, which is my main thing, which I keep evolving.
Give me a teaser without giving away the entire. It's what's your favorite red flag? You don't even have to name the specific company, but kind of it's what aspect of the market kind of is freaking you out the most. Give me the heebie-jeebies.
Well, it's not a matter of freaking me out. I mean, one that I've been my calls have been eerily right on because I have a great network and I talk to some pretty smart people. Enphase and SolarEdge, which SolarEdge is down around 90% from when I first red flagged it back in 2023. And Enphase, which I red flagged at the same time, is down about 70% or so, and they're probably going lower. So we can talk about that a little bit there and what you see with those. And I also don't mind about, and by the way, and I always like to bring up the ones I got wrong because they just gnaw at me. But you're always learning, right? You always think, and then and you revise your process, you revise how you look at things. But one of the ones that I would call it the non-meme, the non-narrative stock, that it was Bros, the coffee company.
That's right.
Which
Sure.
Yeah. That thing shot way up. But most of my ideas, look, my whole thing is trying to avoid. It's stocks to avoid, and that's one not to avoid. Now, the list is about 40 names so far, and these are not names you need to avoid now. Some of them come along, some are fine. This is what I've done over time, and if they've gone well down over a period of time, then I think that bears the thesis out. Most of mine are still in the negative, are still in the red, as they say.
Which is like being under par for a golfer. It's in the negative is actually good if you're raising red flags. That means you're doing quite well. It's the idea, right? I mean, and if you avoid the huge losers, the winners take care of themselves in general.
Well, these are Jeff. These are the companies theoretically that even if they're not huge losers, they're not scams. They're structurally challenged companies. They're companies that will lag the market. They in theory should lag the market, and it's all about really respecting the risk involved in some of these companies and reminding people that there's risk in the markets, which, by the way, I would say right now, and as long as this is going to continue at this pace, you got to keep respecting the risk involved in these companies. And you and I both know that there's nothing more humbling than the market, and it can make the smartest person at any given time realize that they're only human.
And we've gotten a little greedy. We lived through the dot-com crash together, and so it is not like that out there. But you're getting a little whiff of scammy out there. You're getting a little whiff of sort of euphoria, if you will. Yeah, I mean, some of the scam, some of the weaker stocks that I own, those are just unrealized value being seen in the marketplace. But there's a few scams out there. When I see Kohl's go up 100%, I'm not so sure what people are looking at. To name one example.
That's one example. There were quite a few over the past 2 weeks. This is the golden age of grift, my friend. And
the golden age of grift.
The golden age of grift.
Hey, tune in to Herb's live stream. It's a special event. It's going to be tomorrow. It's on Stock Market TV. It's going to be great stuff. Tune in, come early, stay late. Herb's going to tell you about the process, help you avoid some of the biggest disasters or potential disasters out there in the marketplace right now. Herb, it's been a pleasure as always talking to you, and I'll be in touch with you soon, man. Looking forward to the special live event, the red flag alert. You need a
Ooh.
big red flag. You need one waving behind you. He's going to keep you out of the biggest dogs in the street, folks. He's Herb Greenberg. Herb, thanks so much for joining me.
It's always a pleasure, Jeffrey.